All right, we have fantasy sickos from all over the world. First guy from Australia to tell you what wide receiver you should not be taking in fantasy. We have Zach from Fantasyland. My guy, who are we avoiding?
So we all love rookie wide receivers who perform well going into their second year, right? I'm going to be the unpopular guy and say I'm not a big fan of Zay Flowers this year. I think his ADP is a little bit too high. I don't think you're getting this true like top 15 to 12 upside that you think you're getting in that range. So last year he was pretty decent, but he was pretty bad in games when Mark Andrews was actually on the field. If you look at those splits, 10 games with Mark Andrews, only 11 points per game in PPR, and that's on 6 targets per game. That's just not the kind of volume I want to see. And I know we heard all last year, Todd Monken's coming in. We're going to throw the ball a bunch. Well, did you know in 2022, the Ravens were 28th in passing attempts per game? This last year, they were 31st. Yeah. I'm like, okay, so where was this big, uptick in passing? And Lamar's wide receiver one historically has just not been a player you were excited about. I know things have changed. Zay Flowers probably the best receivers he's ever had on his team, I would say. But if you look at his career wide receiver one in fantasy, all right, 2019, wide receiver 46. 2020, wide receiver 36. Wide receiver 22. Wide receiver 69 in 2022. And wide receiver 30 last year was Zay Flowers. So in the last 5 years, the best case scenario is a low-end wide receiver 2 at wide receiver 22. I know they say they want to throw the ball a lot, but they were one of the better offenses in the NFL last year, right? They just added Derrick Henry. Are you sure there's going to be like that goal line or red zone usage for Zay Flowers when Mark Andrews and Derrick Henry are there? I just think the upside is a lot more limited than others do, so I'm not a huge fan of him.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I have a hard time with it because typically I'm trying to draft wide receivers that had good rookie seasons going into year 2, and I'm trying to draft wide receivers that are in good offenses. But the issue that you have with Zay Flowers is an issue that you really see across the entire NFL with the wide receiver ones for these quarterbacks that are great NFL QBs, but the passing volume isn't there because they're going to run the ball so much. You see that with Lamar. I'm a little bit concerned that you're going to end up seeing that with someone like Jaden Daniels and Terry McLaurin this year. Yeah. So I completely understand where you're coming from in that the Ravens offense may be great, but the passing volume may just be limited. If you have someone like Andrews there taking a higher target share than average for a tight end, it may just cap the wide receivers.
And we can't forget, according to this coaching staff, Rashad Bateman's going to be an all-pro this year. So, I mean, if he's actually relevant, if he even gets 15% of the target share, an offense that throws the ball maybe less than anyone else, what is that going to mean for Zay Flowers? So I get the offense is good, but I'm just not sure there's really the true ceiling that you want to draft in that range because it's like round 5. Underdog, I think it might be even round 4. I think it might go higher. So yeah, I just don't think the ceiling's there for me.
All right, next guy, we have Avery from Domain Fantasy Football. Who are we avoiding?
So I'm not drafting any Jameson Williams, and I don't feel like I have to defend this one that bad, but you do have some Jameson Williams truthers out there who think he's done anything of relevance in the NFL so far in his career, and he absolutely hasn't. Dude's played in 18 games over his first 2 years. He has 51 targets in 18 games. That's 2.83 targets per game. I think the dude has puked in practice more times than he gets targets per game at this point. But when you're looking at J-Mo, obviously playing in a really good offense, and he was a really good prospect. He got really good draft capital. He came in high expectations. Then he was an idiot, and he started sports betting in the facility. He got suspended. But when you look historically at guys that start that way in their NFL careers and look how they project out in their third year, literally none of them hit. I mean, you're talking about Jameson Williams would be the outlier of outliers if he were to come in this year and actually have a significant role in that offense, get good target share, and be fantasy productive. This is a guy that when you're talking about what type of player he is, he's going to be a big play, stretch the field type of player. If he's not getting those high targets, I really don't want to chase him in rounds like 9 through 11. And I think a lot of people are reaching on Jameson Williams right now to where they can go pivot and get some high target guys, high opportunity guys in that same range. And with J-Mo, I'm just not confident he's going to be fantasy productive this year.
Yeah, I think Jameson Williams is the perfect example, and I've said this for years, of a wide receiver that could be a good NFL player and bad at fantasy.
Oh, 100%.
Because if he comes in and he stretches NFL defenses and he creates space underneath for Amon-Ra St. Brown, for Sam Laporta, for Jahmyr Gibbs in this running game, that's good for the Detroit Lions. Is it good for you if you draft Jameson in fantasy? No, it just simply doesn't matter.
I mean, was MVS really good for your fantasy team when he was actually a good NFL wide receiver when he played with Patrick Mahomes, right? I mean, the guys stretching the fields are going to open up the field for guys like Sam Laporta. guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown, guys like Jahmyr Gibbs. Those are the top 3 options there from a touchdown perspective. J-Mo's really not a red zone guy. David Montgomery's going to carry it. I mean, J-Mo, like, effectively is the 5th option in that offense. It's a good offense. I don't see J-Mo getting the opportunity to be fantasy productive this year. And so, not to mention, historically, really bad hit rate for guys like that. I'm just avoiding him at all costs.
Now, I will say, Jameson Williams, good guy in best ball because he will have some random spike weeks. So if you are drafting on Underdog Fantasy, which is where I'm drafting every single night on the live stream, you can draft with me in the link in the description, link in the comment section, link in the live chat. It's best ball, so no time commitment at all during the year. It's how I draft hundreds of teams every year. It's how I won $150,000 on Underdog 2 years ago. And yeah, if you use code FLOCK on Underdog Fantasy, you're going to get my 2024 rankings, my 2024 draft guide, my 2024 ADP consensus cheat sheet. Plus, code FLOCK will hook you up with a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. And you will also be getting a Christian McCaffrey special pick'em, more than less than half a total yard for week 1. Quick 25-hour flight later, we have Baki from Fantasyland coming over. My guy, thank you so much. Who are we avoiding this year?
Chris Olave going at the end of the second round in almost every league, it feels like. I think the value is too much purely based off of this offense. I know Clint Kubiak is here, the new offensive coordinator, Derek Carr coming off of this injury, but still, I'm not trusting this offense whatsoever. The offensive line hasn't improved. Derek Carr hasn't improved either. And I understand Chris Olave is essentially the only person on this team, specifically in the wide receiver room outside of Alvin Kamara. I just don't see how he's going to be improving right now going into, this 2024 season. Right now, according to ADP, he's wide receiver 12, wide receiver 11, around that area. I'm looking at Nico Collins, Mike Evans. I mean, even Devon at the end of the second round. I would rather take any of those guys over Chris Olave.
Yeah, what's interesting is, like, you can kind of throw Olave into the same bucket as the guys that he was drafted with, like Drake London, Garrett Wilson. All 3 of these players early on have showed us, they're talented options, but their situation's been bad. Exactly. Drake London and Garrett Wilson got Aaron Rodgers, Kirk Cousins, and Olave's stuck with the same guy.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem like it's going to improve. Even if hypothetically Derek Carr gets injured, it's Spencer Rattler coming in. Like, that's even scarier. That maybe the upside is more exciting because he does have an arm. He can throw the ball down the field, whatever the case may be. But in a consistent week-to-week basis, this is not somebody I'm willing to draft with such capital that we keep seeing every single time, especially in mock drafts. No way. No, thank you. I'm kicking him to the curve right now and rather going with the higher upside player, especially with the quarterback play.
All right, we have Danny from the Fantasy Stock Exchange, the only other person who has their little shtick of an outfit, this time a bandana. Who are we avoiding?
Yeah, we are avoiding Terry McLaurin, wide receiver for the Washington Commanders. And a lot of people are going to reference, this is a talented receiver, clear alpha on his team, best quarterback of his career. But they're really failing to contextualize the fact that Washington tied for the most passing attempts per game in the NFL last year, 37.4. And although Sam Howell wasn't a good NFL quarterback, it's a very similar case to that of 2019 Jameis Winston, where even if he wasn't good by NFL terms, he was throwing the football down the field. He was good for your fantasy football wide receivers, that risk taker, that guy that is not afraid to put it in harm's way. Now, I think Jaden Daniels by far, of course, is an upgrade at the quarterback position, but he's the type of quarterback that's going to be efficient with his passes. He's the type of quarterback that, yes, can target the boundary, but for the most part in this preseason, we've seen it be a really compressed offense to the intermediate portion of the field. They've actually been the lowest ADOT offense in the NFL, 5.5 ADOT across the season for Jaden Daniels in the preseason thus far. Terry McLaurin, I think he's a good NFL talent, but where he's going, especially not to mention, people think he's this young asset, specifically because he was only drafted in 2019. They think he's the same age as DK Metcalf, same age as A.J. Brown. Terry McLaurin's going to be 29 years old, and everybody kind of wants to convince himself of this hypothetical upside that he would have with the quarterback upgrade, but I don't think there's going to be as much volume, especially in the deep portion in terms of what we saw last year. And if Terry McLaurin was going to be this consistent 1,300, 1,400 yard, 8+ touchdown receiver, he simply would have done it by now. So drafting him again, I understand, you're an underdog, you're behind the 8-ball wide receiver. I understand why people, in theory, with the quarterback upgrade are drafting them where they are, but I really just think it's a sexless pick. I really just think it's a pick to fill your lineup rather than actually trying to hit on league-winning upside.
Yeah, like the easiest way to put it is Terry McLaurin's a wide receiver about to be pushing 30. That his highest finish ever is the wide receiver 20 from a points per game perspective. Like, I don't know why people think McLaurin's so good. He's had, I understand, very bad quarterback play, but multiple coaching staffs of multiple different quarterbacks in town, like a laundry list of them. Jaden Daniels coming in will be a good real-life quarterback, But from a passing volume perspective, it's going to be significantly lower than it was a year ago. I think that it's just McLaurin doesn't really separate, but he wins at the catch point. So his highlights look good and his Madden rating is high. So people are convinced that he makes a difference, where the only time he's really exceeded ADP was his rookie season. Every other year since 2019, he has been a disappointing asset in fantasy.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the Madden rating. Like, a lot of people know the name Terry McLaurin, he's high in these Madden ratings. Well, Madden is the same company that has Stephon Diggs as a 92 overall and Nico Collins as an 83 overall. Like, they're typically way behind at giving young players credit and going with name brand players as their higher rated players. So I'm glad you mentioned that caveat. Again, people draft familiarity a lot, especially in your home leagues. If they know the player, I mean, we see Derrick Henry going in the second round. We see, Terry McLaurin, like we said. A lot of players that are well known in past years are the ones that tend to go higher, whereas like the projections, the Nico Collinses of the world, people are a lot slower to get adjusted to.
All right, we're going over to Canada, to the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Cory, who are we avoiding at wide receiver?
We are avoiding Keenan Allen, wide receiver now of the Chicago Bears. Top 5 receiver in points per game last year, so definitely a little bit of a spicier take, I would say, because with the Chargers, he was, bona fide wide receiver 1 for a long time. But going over to Chicago, I'm very worried about the Shane Waldron kind of scheme there. They've been deploying Keenan Allen kind of in this like pseudo JSN role as we saw last year. The vibes and the smell test don't really add up with Keenan Allen right now. He's 230. He looks slow. A lot of smart film people I trust have talked about the fact that he doesn't quite look the same so far. And it all comes down to the fact that this is a very crowded wide receiver core. And I believe so much in DJ Moore and Rome Odunze that I think there will be an odd man out. And to me, that odd man out is Keenan Allen. And because of the name value, I feel like a lot of people will push him up the board in home leagues, and I'm frankly just taking different wide receiver options, different quarterback, tight end options in that area of the board. So for me with Keenan Allen, I think he's a fine option. I think he'll be a complimentary receiver for the Bears. I just don't think he'll be the best one for fantasy because we don't have the same situation like we had with the Chargers where it was just all him.
Yeah, and the thing is, too, I mean, I faded him last year, which obviously got freaking crushed. But now he's going in year 12. In last year, everything broke out perfectly for him. I think Caleb's going to be phenomenal, but I think Caleb as a rookie will be worse than Herbert was last season.
Yeah.
Plus, last year, he had the nut outcome. Quentin Johnston turned out to be a certified pumpkin, and then you also had the injury to Mike Williams right at the beginning of the season. Austin Eckler turned into dust. So I don't know how much of Keenan's production was just him stepping into the best situation you could ever imagine from a fantasy football perspective, where now he's going to have worse quarterback play this year. And instead of being the certified alpha in his offense, at the very best, he's the second option, and he's potentially the third.
Yeah, it kind of seems a little bit Mickey Mouse, his production last year, where it was just like they had to move the ball. They were a pass-heavy team. Like, we also don't know the Bears' tendencies yet. We don't know if they're going to lean on their run game. We don't know how Caleb is going to gravitate towards. The other thing, I think that people like to make the comparison of like, oh, this trio of wide receivers, Shane Waldron worked with JSN, worked with DK Metcalf, worked with Tyler Lockett. The one thing that people need to keep in mind, too, is that Caleb Williams has no chemistry with any of these guys. He comes in, and if anything, he's going to have chemistry with Odunze because they've been working together in mini camps. They've been working together. Dating back to the pre-draft process, they were working together. So I feel like DJ Moore is the best receiver on the team. I feel like Rome Odunze has the potential to develop into the best receiver on the team and might already have the best chemistry with the quarterback. Where does that leave Keenan Allen, especially when the vibe check, the smell test is not adding up so far?
All right, we're going over to Nathan from Domain Fantasy Football. Who are we avoiding?
I'm avoiding George Pickens. I have been for the last couple of years, and this year is not really any different. Even with Deontay Johnson leaving, Arthur Smith is now in. We saw what an Arthur Smith offense looked like in Atlanta that was very run-heavy and that was not utilizing the best weapons in the offense. I mean, regardless of your opinion on Pickens and how good of a talent you think he could be from an NFL perspective, I just don't think we're going to see it really pay off from a fantasy perspective this year, given the new situation, which I'm just not really that big of a fan of for any of the receiving assets in that offense. I mean, you have Russell Wilson and or Justin Fields. I know we just saw DJ Moore produce with Justin Fields, even as a poor passer in 23. I know we've seen guys produce with Russell Wilson before as well, but to me, George Pickens' skill set is just not that of an alpha wide receiver. He's a guy that gets, about 100 targets a year, and he is really good on the outside, has a bunch of really nice highlight plays, and beyond that, he's just kind of a one-trick pony. He hasn't really shown that he can be a diverse route runner or be consistently successful in the route running game. Like, he just doesn't beat people consistently. He's not a premier route runner in the league. So if you can't even be a dominant top 16 route runner in the league, I don't really see you being put in a position to be a lead wide receiver that's going to be, way out producing ADP in 24.
Yeah, what's interesting is, like, just the overall where there's smoke, there's fire. The Steelers are trying to trade for Ayuk.
Yeah, exactly.
These Steelers looked at their wide receiver core and went, we need an alpha here.
Exactly.
And then with Pickens, all we see is highlight grabs. We see, a defender draped all over him. He's on the boundary. But the thing is, every time a defender is draped all over him, you know what I mean? He has the Terry McLaurin effect where he can win at the catch point, but I'd almost rather just have someone that can create the separation in the first place.
Yeah, and I think with Ayuk, that was a great point. Like, if Ayuk were to at some point go to Pittsburgh, which I don't think is likely, then automatically Pickens' price would go down, and then we would have to reevaluate this entire situation. But I don't think that's likely. I don't think it's going to happen, and they're going to be stuck with Pickens as their number one guy, and that's fine for what he is. But I mean, at the end of the day, they're going to have one of the worst wide receiver rooms in the league, and Roman Wilson isn't going to compensate for Deontay Johnson being gone at least year one. I think it's just going to be ugly.
Well, thank you.
Appreciate it.
I really hope we were able to help you out here. Of course, if you want the rankings for everybody you saw in this video, if you want me to break down your fantasy football team with an in-depth podcast, you can do that over on flockfantasy.com. Use code FLOCK. You're going to get 30% off any subscription. I will break down your fantasy football team in a podcast with the annual Mother Flocker subscription. And at the same time, you're going to get my draft guide, 2024 ADP consensus cheat sheet, a ton of premium content and tools. You can check it out all over there. But thank you. Really do appreciate you. And really hope I get to draft against you soon.